Hello and welcome to Please Me. Last week, Eve interviewed Dr. Jennifer Cruz, who talked about how acupuncture can help with conceiving, fertility, menstruation, menopause, and of course, sexual health. Eve discussed her experience with treatments throughout her life, and you won't want to miss it. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Eve is a licensed sexual health physical therapist on a mission to destigmatize conversations about sex. Please sit back and surrender to the pleasure of Please Me. Who's looking for a sexy date? STC.com is the premier ethically non-monogamous dating site that also houses a wealth of information regarding sexuality and sexual health. Join the Please Me Health Collective on STC.com and listen to Eve's free live webinars. Use code 37340 for a free trial membership. Maybe you are in the market for some sexy toys to add some spice to the bedroom. Check out the Organic Lovin' link for the best online store for sex toys, lubes, and more.
Some of the men really couldn't even handle her messaging. They were so shocked and embarrassed by her messaging. And at one point, I remember watching one of the videos where David Letterman was talking to her, and he literally got up out of his chair and walked off the stage to the backstage. Like, he couldn't even handle what she had to say. She was sexually active and all of those things, and she made us see sex in a different way. Hello, and welcome to Please Me, the podcast that aims to destigmatize conversations about sex and sexual health by turning the sheets into our classroom. Today, I have the special honor to introduce Kate Wells and Dr. Leanna Wolf to the show. I have invited them back on. They were both previous guests of mine on Please Me, and I have invited them back on to do a Dr. Ruth tribute. And the reason I think that is so important is because all of us are carrying on Dr. Ruth's legacy in our very own way. Dr. Leanna Wolf is the author of 177 Lovers and Counting. She also just finished a one-woman show at the Hollywood Fringe Festival and is going to be continuing to travel with that show. And I'm so excited to bring you on today, Dr. Leanna Wolf. I just want to say hello first, and then I'll introduce Kate Wells.
Hey, thank you for including me.
Of course. And Kate Wells is what she deems as a biochem nerd, right? And she is the creator of Parlor Games, which is a company that helps women to balance all of the hormonal issues that we have throughout our lives. And I found her on Instagram myself when I was looking for solutions to my own issues with incontinence and with perimenopause and all of those things that I was suffering through in silence. And I found her along the way. And here she is today with me again. Welcome, Kate.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here, and what a great topic to have to talk about. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And Dr. Ruth was such an inspiration. I remember as a small child watching her on television and just being mesmerized by her giggles and her smile and her message. She was such a small little lady, but her message was so incredibly bold. And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, what an interesting woman. And she always held a place in my mind. And it's interesting that since she passed away, I've been watching a lot of her videos on YouTube, basically, and all of the interviews that she did on different talk shows. I also watched her TEDx talk. And it's interesting because all of those interviews were done on shows where men were the host. And I don't know if you've seen any of those, but I just thought it was really interesting because some of the men really couldn't even handle her messaging. They were so shocked and embarrassed by her messaging. And at one point, I remember watching one of the videos where David Letterman was talking to her, and he literally got up out of his chair and walked off the stage to the backstage. Like, he couldn't even handle what she had to say. Do you want to jump in and talk about that, Dr. Leanna Wolf?
Yeah, it was certainly a different time. We live in a time now, as you have referenced in terms of social media, where people are at some level almost numbed to the idea of being upset over the kinds of things that people got upset over in the 80s. And we've had in all kinds of stuff is discussed and aired and played with and exploded and exposed. But that was a much more careful time. And it was like whatever you heard her saying was one of the things she did is she was she really wanted to bring intelligent sex education to a mass audience. And she was no holds barred in telling the truth of how to manage one's body. And before, we never had someone who was so bold and yet so likable.
That's right. She was so likable. And I think that made such a big difference because she was not the picture of what you would consider Jessica Rabbit or somebody like that's a cartoon character. But you know what I'm saying is that she was like very tiny and almost sexual in a way when you looked at her, but she wasn't. She wasn't. She was sexually active and all of those things. And she made us see sex in a different way. And I think that all of us are carrying on our legacy in different ways. I know for messaging wise, I feel as I was listening to her, I was thinking to myself, I'm basically saying the exact same things as Dr. Ruth was saying. Tell your partner how to pleasure you. And she used to talk about not saying any words at all, but just taking their hand and placing it where you want it, and then using their hand to rub on you and to show them exactly what you like. And I am also always talking about communication and explaining to your partner what you like so that you can get your needs met. In physical therapy talk, that hand over hand it's called hand over hand assistance. She was basically teaching us how to do that. And I would love to hear from you, Kate, about how you are using her legacy and how it's inspiring your work.
One of the things that we find through communicating with thousands of our customers is that there's an upwelling of interest in sex and intimacy, particularly after menopause. We really do focus on helping women through that transition and then living a vibrant life after that. And the messages over and over we see in our private Facebook group is, I want to be sexually active. I can get back to that. I can be engaged again. I can rebuild oftentimes a relationship with my partner, with my husband or whomever. And there's some no holds barred conversations going on. Our Facebook group is definitely a safe place where people can share anything that they don't have because still our society is constrained in how we want to talk about these issues. But the pleasure that people are experiencing by reconnecting and the longing to connect sexually, to connect in an intimate way, it certainly does not go away for many women after menopause. And so we create an environment where people can share ideas. Someone is having a particularly hard time communicating with their husband, they'll ask a question, and before you know it, there's 100 responses. Creating this environment for sharing and communicating I think is critical. But women have done that from time immemorial. So I think we're just allowing women to be women in that sense.
I agree, but it's so much more in the forefront now. We have women businesses, we have women platforms, I just interviewed someone last week who has an all-woman acupuncture group. All her staff is women, and she treats women's health. There's so much more there that wasn't there before. And what really struck me, because I'm surrounded by all of this and technology and social media and all of those things, I'm constantly being bombarded by this woman messaging, which I think is a beautiful thing that I'm able to experience now. But when I was looking back at all of her videos, all of them were being interviewed by men. And she didn't have the platforms. She didn't have the ability over time. I'm sure she did in the last however many years that she's been alive, and she had her own platform and that sort of thing. But what I'm saying is that she didn't initially have that, and we do. And I think that is such a beautiful thing now that we do have that for each other. And it's so much more in the forefront, and we're talking about it so much more on shows like Please Me and others like it. And I think that it's a beautiful thing to be able to have this for women supporting women. And, when I had Dr. Leanna Wolf on the show, I said that she was, Please Me's very own Dr. Ruth, right? And that's how I titled the episode. And so I want to just jump on, and I want you to tell me how you think things have changed in the last, 50 years, and how you feel maybe that women's issues are more at the top of the list of things that we can be hopeful for in the future.
That's a goal still, for that to be the case, because still so much medical research and such is not necessarily considering women as models. And like there'll be, therapies that are studied and they never had women subjects. So we're still there. And I love the reference to that Kate was making to women have always been talking. And we've always had circles and sharing and supporting each other. And I know back in the day when I was part of some women's consciousness raising groups in the 70s, where it was all based on women's wisdom. What's happened now is that so much of it is now using media, and especially social media, to give women much more of their own way of presenting. I had some thoughts about how different, let's say, my work is from Dr. Ruth, where she was very much promoting monogamy, and she had a husband, and she was encouraging other folks who were in marital relationships to have good communication with their spouses. Now, I have it much more wide open world than that, because I did my doctoral dissertation on polyamory and jealousy, and then went out into the hinterlands of Africa and New Guinea and studied traditional polygamy, and have been party to the worlds of open relationships here in the Western world. And in terms of thinking about older women, or let's say at least pre-menopausal women, not all of them have partners anymore, nor do they want partners. And there's a whole new version of polyamory coming around that people are practicing even without naming it. And it's called solo polyamory, where one's primary relationship is with oneself. And there isn't the goal of having a domestic partner or sharing a household with somebody, but you're very transparent in your different encounters with other partners, and there's a embrace of your own sexuality as being vibrant and something you're in charge of.
I love that. And I love the distinction that you're making, because yes, Dr. Ruth did always say, I'm a square and I'm very conservative, And I always thought that was interesting because of the messaging that she was putting out there, but she was always talking about monogamy. And you're absolutely right. There are so many more options now, and the landscape of marriage has changed in the last 50, 60, 70 years, where, 50, 60, 70 years ago, 70% of the adult population was married, and now it's only in the low 40s. So yes, there are so many more people that are single, and so many more people that are living their life the way that they want to live it, and however they want to live it sexually. And I think that is a beautiful thing, because we have the power to create the life that we want in whatever direction we want it to go, whether it be business wise or whether it be in our sexual lives. And so I absolutely love that you bring that distinction up. And I just want to ask Kate, because you mentioned something that was so true, in that a lot of the studies that have been done in the past on women's health haven't included women as their subjects, right? And so how do we really know? And Kate just created an incredible testing to show hormones with saliva. And I'm actually in the middle of testing myself, because I can't wait to really compare and contrast the saliva testing with the blood testing that I just recently had done with my gynecologist. And can we just go into that, Kate, and as to why the testing that is now happening in gynecology offices with the blood work is not as specific or is not as sensitive, and what your testing shows more of?
Oh, so be careful what you ask for. I could go on about this one for a long time. I'll try to keep it brief. I was like, this is one of my favorite topics. We're fortunate to have technology, a biochemical technology, testing technology, that allows us to test in multiple ways. And we've got multiple fluids in the body. We do have blood, we have saliva, and we have urine. And all of those fluids can be used to test hormones in different ways, and they will show different things. We also have different options for hormone supplementation. We've got oral supplementation in the form of a pill. We have topical supplementation in the form of creams or patches. And we also have injectable and pellet forms of hormone replacement. And so when we look at testing technology, we want to look at first, what is the method that we're using for hormones? And for so many women, topical hormones are the way to go. Recent studies have identified particularly that estrogen is very important for women's health and is best delivered topically rather than orally, just based on how the body works. The hormones that are applied topically pretty much don't show up in blood testing. They go straight into the interstitial fluid, the fluid that kind of moves around our bodies, and are delivered to the hormone receptors where they're needed at different parts in the body. And so if they go straight there, they don't even go in the blood. So if you test in blood, then you're not really testing the right thing. And yet blood testing has been the gold standard, and blood testing can be covered by insurance. And so that's what practitioners use. It's what they've been taught, and it's what they do. However, the minute anybody is starting to use topical hormones, testing in saliva is the way to go. Now, it's not that we can't get valuable information from any of the methods. It's how you're using it and how you're interpreting that information. And for many women, using topical progesterone, using topical estriol, particularly for vaginal health, or even using DHEA to replace that as we get older, measuring in saliva is going to give you that information that tells you just how much you've got going on and around in your body. And so that's why we wanted to bring this forward. So many of our ladies, they'll say, I went to my doctor and he said, oh, I'm postmenopausal, so I don't need to test. It's utter nonsense.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're postmenopausal, you're not generating any hormones that are worth testing.
And yet you want to actually know what's there. Just because your hormones may be low doesn't mean they're optimal. And there's this whole conversation around what is normal versus optimal. It's normal for women to have low hormones after menopause. Of course it is. Their ovaries don't produce those anymore. It's not optimal. And women can now live 35, 40 years after that menopausal transition. A big part of our work is helping them live optimally. And hormones make a big difference to that. So that's why we introduce the testing, so they know where their hormones are at.
Also, some really interesting research that's been basically refuting the studies that were done, I think maybe in the 60s or maybe a bit later, where they were showing that that estrogen supplementation was dangerous for women and it produced cancers, and the healthiest thing was to not do hormone replacement therapy. And those studies were basically refuted in a really interesting book by Carol Tavris on, I think it's, anyway, her book dissects the crazy research that people believe, where they took all these women who were over 60 off of hormone replacement because it was seen as dangerous. And the studies were done poorly. They didn't tell the truth of what goes on.
There was an incredible amount of damage done to women. Most of the studies, the big one was the Women's Health Initiative study, which was halted in 2002. So the storylines on that never gets told is that those studies were done on the synthetic hormones, the estrogen hormones, the
Right.
progesterone-like hormones that are not what we would call bioidentical. They don't have the same chemical structure as the hormones made by the body. But no studies, large-scale studies were done on bioidentical hormones. Meanwhile, plenty of women have continued perfectly happily on the bioidentical hormones and been just fine. And these follow-up studies are showing there's one that actually came out and identified that for women who actually had breast cancer, those who were on some form of estrogen actually do better than those who were not.
Fascinating.
Right. So there is a lot of unwinding of the messaging around
Yeah,
hormones
very
are danger,
important.
must.
Absolutely. I am 100% on board with helping to get that messaging out there, because 1/3 of our lives will be lived in menopause. That is a huge chunk of our lives. And when you go to the doctor's office and they say, and they discount you, your hormones aren't important anymore because you're postmenopausal, that is not okay. We need to be vibrant during that last third of our lives. Why can't it be the best third of our lives? And it doesn't have to be the worst and the craziest and the sweatiest and all of that. It's incredible. We could go ahead, jump on in.
Okay, so basically what we're addressing is that sex apart from reproduction is valuable. And it was really interesting when I was doing some field work in Africa. I met some women whose daughters were expecting babies, and they said, since my daughter is expecting a child, there's no point for me to have sex with my husband anymore because I should not be having more children. So let's say this woman is in her 40s and her daughter is in her 20s. She's basically just saying, sex exists in my life to reproduce. And if reproducing isn't what I want to do, then there's no reason to have sex anymore. And
that was in Africa?
Was certainly when women live shorter lives, or in contexts where sex, the main purpose of sex is for reproduction. And certainly much of Christianity was about, you have to be married to have sex. You have to have, and that it's all centered around reproduction. And even Orthodox Judaism with the mikveh baths, they set women up to only have sex with their husbands during the fertile time of their cycle. So if you're a woman who's no longer fertile because you've been through menopause, then you're basically disregarded as a sexual being until now, when we have people like Kate who are really doing important hormone education. And the book I was referring to by Carol Tavris is called Estrogen Matters. And it's an extraordinary book in terms of looking, and you have it there. There you go. So, yeah, so you're on board with all this fantastic refuting of poorly done research.
Are you in menopause, perimenopause, or postmenopause? I have found the absolute best products called Parlor Games. I use the estriol and progesterone topical creams, and they have been game changers. Maybe you've listened to the show and want to be featured as a guest. Eve uses Podmatch to connect with new or potential guests. Reach out and begin the process today.
Kate and I were talking before you jumped on, Leanna, about how we feel a renewed sense of hope for women, and all of this work that has been done up until this point is part of that and getting that messaging out. But I just want to in our climate, that we are in now, and I would love to just have you comment on that, Kate.
I think women are particularly good at being hopeful because often the odds are stacked against them. And it is hopefulness that keeps them going in many situations, the hopefulness that something can be better. And I must admit, over the last 3 days, I have spent a little more time on social media than I typically do because I have been getting my oxytocin. I've been getting my dopamine. I've been getting all my feel goods from seeing all these groups run by women who are just exploding into the space of empowering women. Groups I never knew existed. I have always put myself in the feminist category, which, having grown up in England, felt like a bit of a fight from the get-go. But it's not so much about feminism. I think it's about empowerment. We have over half our population are women. We lead from a different point of view. We lead through consensus. We lead through laughter. We lead. We're not afraid to talk about the hard things. We are courageous. We are brave. And I see these, when you think about a lily pond, and you've got a lily here and a lily here and a lily here and a lily here, and then they all replicate. And before you know it, you've got the whole pond covered with lilies. It's like I have this exciting sense about the groups of women who are empowering others to own how awesome they are, to identify and own their skills and their gifts, and to create environments where this different way of being is honored and appreciated and valued. And that all collectively just begins to put hope back into my heart, which had somewhat filtered a little bit away over the last couple of years.
Yes, I agree. And I definitely am feeling hopeful for the future as well. And I just want to, excuse me, I want to read a Pink quote that I saw on the internet the other day. And I love this quote so much because I feel like it is exactly what we should be thinking about as women. And she says, when they say a woman has to slow down, become smaller, take up less space, calm down, no, absolutely not. Why? Who says? Why can't we ride until the wheels fall off? That's what I plan to do. Isn't that amazing? You want to just jump on, Leanna, and respond to that quote?
That we do live in a different time. I was just reflecting back on some of the early feminist chatter about sex in the 70s. And basically there was this article that was published that got a huge amount of play and was called The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm. And Freud had promoted this idea that married women orgasmed through intercourse. Non-married women orgasmed through direct clitoral stimulation. And the women who were writing this article were noting that few women they knew were orgasming through intercourse alone. And so this became the belief that went on. And Cher Hite wrote a book claiming that over 70% of women cannot orgasm without direct clitoral stimulation. And then we see the emergence of the toy industry. There were vibrators back in the 19th century when women went to their gynecologist to deal with hysteria, and basically hysteria was probably pent up sexual energy, and right. and they were treated with vibrators and right. released. And
who is not missing their doctor's appointments week after week, right?
No, they were valuable. They were valuable. So now we have all matter of toys being produced, and largely they're centered around women and helping women get off better. But there's more and more toys that are couple oriented, and many lesbians enjoy shared toys, which involve double penetration from each end of the toy. And we have a very different world in terms of explicitness and in terms of appreciating all matters of sex education. And much of it has been achieved through chats about toys.
I love that. And I have a curated list of toys on my website, pleaseme.online. And I love those toys that you're talking about. And there is even an LGBT rainbow dildo that I have on there that I think is really fun and funny. And strap-ons. A woman can now have a penis if she wants one. And so you're absolutely right. Like, the toy industry has exploded, and conversations about orgasms has also really been more in the forefront. But there's still a lot of miseducation, which I think is so important, and which is why I am always talking about orgasm equality and the orgasm gap, because a lot of people still don't understand that 95% of women do need external clitoral stimulation in order to orgasm, and that only 3 to 5% of women can orgasm from penetration alone. So I think that those things are so
and
important.
some of that really, Eve, actually, some of that actually depends on partner communication, and that folks that figure out positions where the clitoris is rubbing on the pelvic bone as if it was being directly stimulated with a toy, but it's because of how they position themselves, can be fully orgasmic. But we have very limited intercourse education.
Right,
And
and that's
also, we Western women are not necessarily schooled in how to use our Kegel muscles, that they need to be exercised, that to have strong ones that can really grab and respond is not something that mothers teach their daughters.
that's so true.
And
It's
other cultures do. I was in Thailand and I went to one of these underground sex bars where women were doing pussy tricks, and they could do all kinds of things. They could toss ping pong balls. They could blow smoke. They just crazy ass things. But it was because they had strong Kegel muscles. And we are only concerned about virginity and diseases. We really in terms of mainstream culture. And it's all, and to think about all the ways that women could really own their sexualities is quite extraordinary. And a lot of previously women were regarded as oversexed in old Europe, and that they basically trained, they had to subdue women because they were regarded as the one who needed more sex. And it was a grand story that in Victorian times that treated women as too fragile to engage in intercourse.
That's interesting, because we're so strong. We give birth. There's nothing more incredibly strong that a woman can do. And we're so resilient. Obviously, changing that narrative into how can we strengthen our pelvic floor, and you mentioned, and our Kegels, and doing those. There's so many strengthening exercises, not just Kegels, but so many. As a licensed physical therapist, this is what I do in my practice. I teach people how to do all of these exercises so that they can blow smoke rings or throw ping pong balls if they want to, and other party tricks that your partners will thank you for. And you'll thank yourself for too, because we deserve love and pleasure. And that's the bottom line. Our bodies were built for pleasure. We have, neurons from head to toe. Our pleasure receptors are all over our bodies. And women have more than men do, right? We have a lot more on our clitoris than a man has on his penis, right? And so we are built for pleasure. And if we are not expressing that, we're really missing out. And so I just want to thank you both for being here today and for helping me to give a tribute to Dr. Ruth Westheimer, who I think was a big push in all of our lives in one way or another. And I just want to end with how you think her work influenced you. Kate, you want to start?
I think the messaging, you mentioned that she was conservative, yes. And yet she was determined to raise the conversation about a topic that was, for all intents and purposes, quite taboo. And she did it in a matter-of-fact and fun and approachable way. And I think we just have to honor and continue that style of communication about sexuality. Let's be matter-of-fact about it. Let's be fun about it. And that's what I take away.
It's all about having fun, right? And enjoying our lives to the most. Do you want to jump in, Leanna?
Yeah, her tone, as Kate was referencing, was basically it's okay and it's for everyone and pleasure is good and communication is absolutely needed. And don't be shy about bringing things up to your partner so you two can have the best connection possible. And she like popularized having good sex. And I'm more out the in in the wings in terms of some of my beliefs and interests in terms of not necessarily endorsing monogamy as the way for erotic pleasure or satisfaction. And I've done a lot of explorations of, I guess, what we could call edge play and things having to do with power play and power exchange and multiple partners. And maybe that's okay for your Dr. Ruth on your show, but back in the 80s, what she was talking about was exactly what needed to be said.
Yes, there's a time and place for everything. And she was at the right time and place for people to accept her messaging. And now we're building on that and really taking it to another level. Mm-hmm. And I agree that her messaging of monogamy is not across the board what everybody wants anymore. And I do talk a lot about relationship options, which Leanna, you call something else. I can't remember what it is. It's a more scientific term, but the bottom line is there are a lot more options out there, and exploring our sexuality in whatever way is most comfortable to us is okay. And I also want to mention here, because you mentioned power play, and I just want to mention on another separate wing of power is that we as women have the power to change our own lives, right? And then also collectively to change the future. And do you want to just jump on and say something about that, Kate?
Oh, yes. I think I will always talk about this topic. I think, let's just use the image of the mushroom. Are at a point in our culture, certainly in this country, where there is a blossoming, a blooming, an upwelling of collective wisdom that is coming from women, where we are embracing the strengths that we have. We are embracing how we do things differently. We are embracing our power, and we are connecting the dots further and further to bring our wisdom into the world. When I'm going to go back to menopause, or after we are done with that transition, we're done with a lot of the constraints that held us in one place, and held us bound to certain actions that we're taking related to family. And we step into a space where we still have our wits about us. We have our own wisdom, and we can communicate with other women in our 60s and our 70s, where we have so much knowledge. We have so much understanding of how the world works. We can step into transforming the world for not just ourselves, but other generations of women and their families because of that.
Absolutely. We hold so much more power than we give ourselves credit for. Collectively, women hold so much more power than we give ourselves credit for. And I say, and I thought of both of you when I thought about doing this tribute, because I know that both of you have so much wisdom as women, and I respect you both so much. And so I say, let's all step into our power as women and help our messaging in our own ways move forward. And I thank you both for being who you are. And thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you, Eve. It was lovely to be here. Dr. Wolf, it was lovely to meet you too.
You too, Kate. Great to meet you.
Thank you all for being on the show. And we will regroup next week. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Looking for the best live streaming or podcast recording site? Look no further than StreamYard. Get $10 off your first purchase. For podcast hosting, Buzzsprout is the absolute best option out there. Get $20 off your first purchase. Feel free to call me on the OWL app. Use code EH576472 for $10 free to use on the best networking app around. give me a call. If you're experiencing sexual issues and need a physical therapy consultation or appointment, reach out to Eve and make an appointment on pleaseme.online. See all links and info in the show notes.